The Lost Child. Long, long ago there lived a very rich nobleman. But though he was so rich he was not happy, for he had no children to whom he could leave his wealth. He was no longer young, and he felt that opportunity was fading. Every day he and his wife went to church to pray for a son. At last, after long waiting, God sent them what they desired. Now the evening before its arrival the father dreamed that its chance of living would depend upon one condition, namely, that its feet never touched the earth until it was 12 years old. Great care was taken that this should be avoided, and when the little stranger came, only trustworthy nurses were employed to look after him. As the years passed on the child was diligently guarded, sometimes he was carried in his nurse's arms, sometimes rocked in his golden cradle, but his feet never touched the ground. Now when the end of the time drew near the father began preparations for a magnificent feast which should be given to celebrate his son's release. One day while these were in progress a frightful noise, followed by most unearthly yells, shook the castle. The nurse dropped the child in her terror and ran to the window. That instant the noises ceased. On turning to take up the boy, imagine her dismay when she found him no longer there, and remembered that she had disobeyed her master's orders. Hearing her screams and lamentations, all the servants of the castle ran to her. The father soon followed, asking, "What is the matter? What has happened? Where is my child?" The nurse, trembling and weeping, told of the disappearance of his son, his only child. No words can tell the anguish of the father's heart. He sent servants in every direction to hunt for his boy, he gave orders, he begged and prayed, he threw away money right and left, he promised everything if only his son might be restored to him. Search was made without loss of time, but no trace of him could be discovered. He had vanished as completely as if he had never existed. Many years later the unhappy nobleman learned that in one of the most beautiful rooms of the castle footsteps could be heard, as if someone was walking up and down stairs accompanied by dismal groans. Anxious to follow the matter up, for he thought it might in some way concern his lost son, he made known that a reward of 300 gold pieces would be given to anyone who would watch for one whole night in the haunted room. Many were willing but had not the courage to stay till the end, for at midnight, when the dismal groans were heard, they would run away rather than risk their lives for 300 gold pieces. The poor father was in despair and knew not how to discover the truth of this dark mystery. Now close to the castle dwelt a widow, a miller by trade, who had 3 daughters. They were very poor, and hardly earned enough for their daily needs. When they heard of the midnight noises in the castle and the promised reward, the eldest daughter said, "As we are so very poor, we have nothing to lose, surely we might try to earn these 300 gold pieces by remaining in the room one night. I should like to try, mother, if you will let me." The mother shrugged her shoulders, she hardly knew what to say, but when she thought of the poverty and the difficulty, they had to earn a living, she gave permission for her eldest daughter to remain one night in the haunted room. Then the daughter went to ask the nobleman's consent. "Have you really the courage to watch for a whole night in a room haunted by ghosts? Are you sure you are not afraid, my good girl?" "I am willing to try this very night," she replied. "I would only ask you to give me some food to cook for my supper, for I am very hungry." Orders were given that she should be supplied with everything she wanted, and indeed enough food was given her, not for one supper only, but for 3. With the food, some dry firewood and a candle, she entered the room. Like a good housewife, she first lit the fire and put on her saucepans, then she laid the table and made the bed. This filled up the early part of the evening. The time passed so quickly that she was surprised to hear the clock strike 12, and at the last stroke, footsteps shook the room, and dismal groans filled the air. The frightened girl ran from one corner to the other but could not see anyone. But the footsteps and the groans did not cease. Suddenly a young man approached her and asked, "For whom is this food cooked?" "For myself," she said. The gentle face of the stranger saddened, and after a short silence he asked again, "And this table, for whom is it laid?" "For myself," she replied. The brow of the young man clouded over, and the beautiful blue eyes filled with tears as he asked once more, "And this bed, for whom have you made it?" "For myself," replied she in the same selfish and indifferent tone. Tears fell from his eyes as he waved his arms and vanished. Next morning, she told the nobleman all that had happened, but without mentioning the painful impression her answers had made upon the stranger. The 300 golden crowns were paid, and the father was thankful to have at last heard something that might possibly lead to the discovery of his son. On the following day the second daughter, having been told by her sister what to do and how to answer the stranger, went to the castle to offer her services. The nobleman willingly agreed, and orders were given that she should be provided with everything she might want. Without loss of time she entered the room, lit the fire, put on the saucepans, spread a white cloth upon the table, made the bed, and awaited the hour of midnight. When the young stranger appeared and asked, "For whom is this food prepared? For whom is the table laid? For whom is the bed made?" she answered as her sister had bidden her, "For me, for myself only." As on the night before, he burst into tears, waved his arms, and suddenly disappeared. Next morning, she told the nobleman all that had happened except the sad impression her answers had made upon the stranger. The 300 gold pieces were given her, and she went home. On the third day the youngest daughter wanted to try her fortune. "Sisters," said she, "as you have succeeded in earning 300 gold crowns each, and so helping our dear mother, I too should like to do my part and remain a night in the haunted room." Now the widow loved her youngest daughter more dearly than the others and dreaded to expose her to any danger, but as the elder ones had been successful, she allowed her to take her chance. So, with the instructions from her sisters as to what she should do and say, and with the nobleman's consent and abundant provisions, she entered the haunted room. Having lit the fire, put on the saucepans, laid the table and made the bed, she awaited with hope and fear the hour of midnight. As 12 o'clock struck, the room was shaken by the footsteps once again, and the air was filled with cries and groans. The girl looked everywhere, but no living being could she see. Suddenly there stood before her a young man who asked in a sweet voice, "For whom have you prepared this food?" Now her sisters had told her how to answer and how to act, but when she looked into the sad eyes of the stranger, she resolved to treat him kindlier. "Well, you do not answer me, for whom is the food prepared?" he asked again impatiently, as she made no reply. Somewhat confused, she said, "I prepared it for myself, but you too are welcome to it." At these words his brow grew more serene. "And this table, for whom is it spread?" "For myself, unless you will honor me by being my guest." A bright smile illumined his face. "And this bed, for whom have you made it?" "For myself, but if you have need of rest it is for you." He clapped his hands for joy and replied, "Ah, that's right. I accept the invitation with pleasure, and all that you have been so kind as to offer me. But wait, I pray you wait for me. I must first thank my kind friends for the care they have taken of me." A fresh warm breath of spring filled the air, while at the same moment a deep precipice opened in the middle of the floor. He descended lightly, and she, anxious to see what would happen, followed him, holding on to his mantle. Thus, they both reached the bottom of the precipice. Down there a new world opened itself before her eyes. To the right flowed a river of liquid gold, to the left rose high mountains of solid gold, in the center lay a large meadow covered with millions of flowers. The stranger went on, the girl followed unnoticed. And as he went, he saluted the field flowers as old friends, caressing them and leaving them with regret. Then they came to a forest where the trees were of gold. Many birds of different kinds began to sing, and flying round the young stranger perched familiarly on his head and shoulders. He spoke to and petted each one. While thus engaged, the girl broke off a branch from one of the golden trees and hid it in remembrance of this strange land. Leaving the forest of gold, they reached a wood where all the trees were of silver. Their arrival was greeted by an immense number of animals of various kinds. These crowded together and pushed one against another to get close to their friend. He spoke to each one and stroked and petted them. Meanwhile the girl broke off a branch of silver from one of the trees, saying to herself, "These will serve me as tokens of this wonderful land, for my sisters would not believe me if I only told them of it." When the young stranger had taken leave of all his friends, he returned by the paths he had come, and the girl followed without being seen. Arrived at the foot of the precipice, he began to ascend, she followed silently, holding on to his mantle. Up they went higher and higher, until they reached the room in the castle. The floor closed without trace of the opening. The girl returned to her place by the fire, where she was standing when the young man approached. "All my farewells have been spoken," said he. "Now we can have supper." She hastened to place upon the table the food she had prepared, and sitting side by side they supped together. When they had made a good meal, he said, "Now it is time to rest." He lay down on the carefully made bed, and the girl placed by his side the gold and silver branches she had picked in the mineral land. In a few moments he was sleeping peacefully. Next day the sun was already high in the sky, and yet the girl had not come to give an account of herself. The nobleman became impatient. He waited and waited, becoming more and more uneasy. At last he determined to go and see for himself what had happened. Picture to yourself his surprise and joy, when on entering the haunted chamber he saw his long-lost son sleeping on the bed, while beside him sat the widow's beautiful daughter. At that moment the son awoke. The father, overwhelmed with joy, summoned the attendants of the castle to rejoice with him in his new-found happiness. Then the young man saw the 2 branches of metal, and said with astonishment, "What do I see? Did you then follow me down there? Know that by this act you have broken the spell and released me from the enchantment. These 2 branches will make 2 palaces for our future dwelling." Thereupon he took the branches and threw them out of the window. Immediately there were seen 2 magnificent palaces, one of gold, the other of silver. And there they lived happily as man and wife, the nobleman's son and the miller's daughter. And if they are not dead, they live there still.